The cold at -70 degrees Fahrenheit is not just a temperature. It is a living entity that devours your thoughts, then your movements, and finally your life. I started that day as a hunter, proud to provide for my family. I ended up as the sole survivor. In just one night, I watched my father, my son, my wife, and my daughter be ripped away from me one by one, while my bloodied hands built an igloo that was supposed to save us. They tell me it was a miracle that I am alive. But what kind of cruel miracle leaves a man alive while taking everyone he loves? I am Chayton Storm, and I have dedicated my life to listening to and sharing the impactful stories of Indigenous peoples. Stories of resilience, loss, and hope here in the U.S. and around the world. Now, with the new Trump administration initiative, a direct channel has been opened in Washington, allowing our Indigenous brothers and sisters to bring their voices, their struggles, and their truths to the government's attention. This is an unyielding battle to ensure we are heard, recognized, and respected. And in this video, you will see a story so devastating that it shocked even President Donald Trump. The merciless Arctic took its toll, and an Inuit family paid with their very lives. Get ready. What you are about to hear is not just a tragedy. It is an account of despair, struggle, and an irreparable loss in the relentless cold of -70 degrees Fahrenheit. And before we begin, just one request. Help spread the stories of our brothers even further. Subscribe and leave your like. The cold felt like blue fire on my skin. -70 degrees Fahrenheit. How do you explain it to someone who has never felt it? It is not just a temperature. It is a living entity that first devours your thoughts, then your movements, and finally your life. And so it was, under this invisible monster, that I watched every member of my family be ripped away from me, one by one, while my bloodied hands fought against what I already knew to be inevitable. I am a Putsiak. In Inuktitut, my name means snow, an irony that still takes my breath away. I was born of ice and taught to respect it, to love it. Now, all I feel is hatred when the temperature drops below zero. When I see tourists admiring the beauty of the northern lights, I want to scream that the dancing sky is the same one that watched, indifferent, as my entire family died. But let me tell you how it all began. How on a single winter night in the Arctic, I lost everything that gave my life meaning. It started like any other hunting day. The sky was clear when we set out. Me, my father Malik, my wife Pipaluk, and our children, 12-year-old Anik and just 7-year-old Nanook. It was October, and winter had arrived earlier and more cruelly than we had anticipated. Malik, at 67, was still the best hunter in our small community in the far north of Canada. Americans are talking about global warming, he used to say with an ironic laugh. But here, the ice still decides who lives and who dies. We had strayed further than planned following a herd of caribou. Our community needed the meat, the hides, the tendons. Everything would be used during the long winter. 3 caribou down, our expedition had been a success. It was then that the sky began to change. There were signs. There are always signs, if you know how to read them. The wind changed direction 3 times in less than an hour. The clouds, once just a thin white layer on the horizon, began to pile up like inverted mountains. Apuchiak, my father called, his voice already struggling against the rising wind. We need to go back. Now. We loaded our sleds with the meat from the hunt and began the journey back. But the storm, the elders would later call it Sulakyuk, the devouring spirit, arrived with a speed none of us had ever witnessed before. In minutes, the world around us disappeared. There was no more horizon, no more sky or land, just a white, howling fury that swallowed everything. The temperature plummeted like a stone in the ocean. Later, I would learn it dropped to -70 degrees Fahrenheit. But at that moment, we only felt that each breath froze part of our lungs. "Daddy, I'm scared," Nanook shouted, his small voice almost inaudible in the storm. Pipalook held him tightly against her chest, wrapping him in more layers of seal skin. "We need shelter," I shouted to my father. Our dogs were in a panic, pulling the sled in circles. "We won't make it home in this storm." It was then that Malik made the decision that would seal our fate. "We will build an igloo. Right here. Now." A well-built igloo can be the difference between life and death in the Arctic. For generations, our people have built them as temporary refuges during hunts, or even as winter homes. My grandfather could build one in less than an hour. I had helped build dozens of them throughout my life, but never under those conditions. The snow was wrong, too dry, too brittle to form the solid blocks we needed. The wind was so strong that it ripped the snow from our hands as we tried to cut it. Our bone knives could barely penetrate the crystallized surface. "We need to dig deeper," my father shouted. "The snow lower down is firmer." With our tools and bare hands, we began to dig. The pain was indescribable. Imagine plunging your hands into shards of glass, repeatedly, while someone pours ice-cold water over the cuts. Our skin gloves, even being the best we had made, could not protect our fingers from that killer cold. Anik, my oldest daughter, worked alongside us like a true warrior. "I'm helping, Dad," she said, her small hands already cracked and bleeding as she tried to mimic our block-cutting technique. Her face was pale, her lips already blue, but her eyes, those dark eyes had a fire that the storm had not yet extinguished. As we fought against the ice, Pipalook had created a small makeshift shelter with caribou skins, where she tried to keep Nanook warm. I could hear her soft voice singing old Inuit songs about the Great Bear and the navigating stars, trying to distract our son from the horror surrounding us. The blocks finally began to take shape. One by one, we positioned them, forming the base circle. My fingers had lost all sensitivity. They were just tools of flesh moving by sheer willpower. With each block raised, a small victory against the death that surrounded us. It was then I noticed my father was slowing down. His hands, always strong and precise, were now trembling uncontrollably. "Dad," I shouted against the wind, "rest for a bit, I'll keep going." He shook his head, stubborn as always. "We don't have time to rest, son. The cold doesn't wait." But there was something in his gaze that froze me inside more than any storm. It was a look of farewell. We were almost halfway through the construction when Malik fell. It wasn't dramatic like in the movies. He simply stopped, looked at me with those ancient eyes that had seen more winters than I would ever see, and then slid to the ground like a melting block of ice. "Dad!" I ran to him, dropping the snow block I was holding. His face was strangely serene despite the howling wind around us. He held my hand. His fingers were blue, almost black at the tips. "Kumaruak," he whispered, using my childhood nickname, Little Bear. "The igloo. Finish the igloo." "Let's finish it together," I insisted, trying to lift him. But his body was heavy, as if he was already becoming part of the frozen earth beneath us. He smiled. A smile I carried with me since then, in every nightmare, in every moment of silence. "You know how it is, son. When an old Inuit's body decides it's time, not even the strongest of suns can change that." He coughed, a wet sound that terrified me. "Follow the path of the snow, like your name." Then he spoke something in an ancient dialect, words my father rarely used, the ancestral language that few still mastered. Words that the wind carried away before I could fully understand them. Something about spirits and lights in the sky. And then, he was gone. His eyes fixed on the white whirlwind above, as if he could see something we could not. Perhaps the navigating stars beyond the storm, guiding him to the other side. I had no time for mourning. Not there. Not in that moment. With trembling hands, more from emotion than from cold, I closed his eyes. "Travel well, Dad." That was all I could say before the wind swallowed my words. I looked at the partially built igloo, at my wife and children trembling in the makeshift shelter, at my father's body, which was already starting to be covered by the relentless snow. The choice was clear and brutal. Continue or let us all die. What happened to Grandpa? Nanook's voice reached me as I returned to work, now alone, trying to lift the heavy snow blocks. He's resting, Pipalook replied, hugging him tighter. Our gazes crossed over the boy's head. She knew. We didn't need words. The igloo was slowly growing, very slowly. A task that should take an hour now seemed impossible. Each block positioned was a battle against the cutting wind, against my own muscles stiffened by the cold, against the rising despair. Anik came out of the makeshift shelter and approached me. "Let me help, Dad," she shouted against the wind. I wanted to send her back to the shelter, to protect her from that killer cold. But the truth was, I needed help. With her small fingers already hard from the cold, she began to fill the gaps between the blocks with loose snow, a crucial task to ensure the igloo's insulation. "It's looking nice," she said, trying to smile as her tears froze on her cheeks. She knew about my father. I saw it in her eyes. Grandpa would be proud. Those simple words almost broke me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and kept working. The pain in my fingers had turned into a strange numbness. My torn nails, the ripped skin, it no longer mattered. The blood froze before it could even drip to the ground. It was then I heard Pipalook scream. I dropped the snow block and ran to the makeshift shelter. Pipalook was wrapping Nanook, rocking him as she did when he was a baby. He stopped shaking, she said, her voice breaking. Suddenly, he just stopped. I dropped to my knees beside them. Nanook looked peacefully asleep, as Americans say. A peaceful sleep. His small face, always so expressive, was now serene, almost comfortable. "Nanook?" I called, touching his face. His skin was cold, but no colder than my own. "Son?" I shook him gently, then more forcefully. "Nothing. He's just sleeping," Pipalook insisted, still rocking him. He said he was tired. I said he could sleep a little. But we both knew the truth. In the Arctic, when the extreme cold takes over, the body sometimes quietly gives up. First comes the drowsiness, an almost pleasant feeling of warmth after so much cold. Then, sleep. A sleep from which one does not awaken. No, 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 I repeated like a useless mantra, rubbing his small hands between my bloodied ones, blowing warm air on his face. "Nanook, wake up. Please, son, wake up." Anik slowly approached, her steps sinking into the snow. She looked at her brother and understood immediately. No tears, no screams, just a look of understanding far beyond her 12 years. "We need to finish the igloo, Dad," she finally said, her voice strangely adult. "Or we'll all die here." Pipalook still held Nanook against her chest, softly singing a lullaby as if she could bring him back. Her gaze was distant, lost somewhere beyond the storm. "Pipalook," I called, touching her shoulder. "We need to keep going." She didn't respond, just continued rocking our son's body, singing quieter and quieter. With a broken heart, I took Anik by the hand, and we returned to the partially built igloo. The storm seemed even fiercer now, as if celebrating its victories over us. "Let's work fast," I said to Anik, forcing myself to focus on the task that could save whoever was left. Every minute counts. The following hours were a blur of pain, effort, and growing despair. The igloo slowly took shape, but our strength dwindled even faster. We hadn't eaten anything since the previous morning. The caribou meat we had hunted was in the sled, buried under the snow that kept falling. My stomach had gone from the pain of hunger to a hollow emptiness consuming my insides. With every block lifted, I felt part of my own life being drained. Anik worked silently beside me, her movements growing slower but determined. Occasionally, I caught her looking at the small shelter where Pipalook still held Nanook's body. "Is Mom going to be okay?" she finally asked, her voice almost inaudible under the howling wind. "Yes," I lied. She just needs time. The truth was that Pipalook had closed herself off in her own world of pain. When I tried to take her to the partially built igloo, she refused to let go of Nanook. "He'll feel cold if I leave him," she insisted, her eyes feverish with exhaustion and sorrow. The igloo finally took enough shape to shelter us. It wasn't perfect. Far from it. Under normal circumstances, I would have been ashamed to show such a precarious structure to my father. The walls were uneven, the entrance poorly aligned. But it would do. "Anik, go inside," I instructed, helping her through the small opening. "I'll get your mother." When I returned to the makeshift shelter, I found Pipalook motionless, still holding Nanook's body. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes half closed. "Pipalook," I called, shaking her gently. "We built a shelter. We need to go in." She looked at me, but her eyes seemed to see through me, as if I were just another ghost in that white landscape. "He's so light now," she murmured, stroking Nanook's hair, like a little seal swimming on the ice. Carefully, I tried to take Nanook from her arms, but she clung to him with surprising strength. "We can't leave him here," she whispered. "The ice spirits will take him." "Pipalook, please," I pleaded, feeling my own resistance failing. "Anik needs you. I need you." Something in my words seemed to reach her. For a brief moment, I saw my wife return to those lost eyes. She looked at our son's body, then at me, and finally nodded. "Can we take him with us?" she asked, her voice small like a child's. "Yes," I agreed, knowing it was useless to argue. "We'll all go together." Carefully, I helped her to her feet, her limbs stiff from cold and immobility. Together, we carried Nanook's body to the igloo where Anik was waiting for us. Inside the igloo, the wind was just a distant wail. The temperature, though still brutal, was bearable compared to the frozen hell outside. Under normal circumstances, we would have lit a small seal oil lamp to warm the space. But our supplies had been left in the sled, now likely buried under meters of snow. We huddled together, sharing the little warmth our exhausted bodies could still generate. Pipalook still held Nanook, refusing to accept that he was gone. Anik trembled violently against my chest. "Dad," she whispered after a long silence. "Where's Grandpa?" I closed my eyes, the pain of loss as sharp as the cold. "He's out there, under the stars." "He liked the stars," she murmured sleepily. "He taught me all of them." Hunger tortured our empty stomachs. The last caribou we had taken down, just a few meters away under the snow, could feed us for weeks. The irony was too cruel to bear. Pipalook began to sing again, an old hunting song that spoke of patience and waiting. Her voice, usually clear and strong, was now just a hoarse whisper. "I'm so hungry," Anik finally admitted, her small hand gripping my arm. "I know you are, little hunter," I replied, using the nickname my father had given her. "When the storm passes, we'll find food. Promise?" "I promise." Another lie. Around us, the storm showed no signs of weakening. On the contrary, it seemed to gain strength with the arrival of the polar night. At some point during those endless hours, Pipalook stopped singing. Her body relaxed against mine, her head drooping to the side. "I'm so tired, Aputshak," she whispered, her breath a weak vapor in the darkness. "So tired." "Hang in there," I pleaded, holding her hand. It was cold, colder than the snow around us. "Please, hang in there. Take care of our daughter," she said, so softly I could barely hear. "Nanook is calling me. Do you hear?" "Pipalook, no," I begged, shaking her. "Stay with me. Stay with us." She smiled, a smile so serene it seemed out of place in that frozen hell. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I loved you from the first day I saw you hunting with your father. Remember? You brought that huge seal." "I remember," I replied, tears freezing on my face. "And you said I was too showy to deserve a wife." She laughed softly, the most beautiful and terrible sound I had ever heard. "And you were. Her eyes slowly closed, as if she were just resting after a long day's work. Her breathing, increasingly shallow, finally ceased. "Mom?" Anik called, her voice breaking the heavy silence. "Mom, wake up!" There was no way to protect her from that truth. There were no comforting words that could ease what we were going through. "She's with Nanook now," was all I could say, holding my daughter as she sobbed against my chest. And so we remained. A broken father, a devastated daughter, and the bodies of the mother and brother gathered in a final embrace inside a poorly constructed igloo while the world outside continued to punish us mercilessly. The night passed like an endless nightmare. The cold penetrated our bones. Despite the shelter of the igloo, food, without water, our bodies began to fail. Dehydration was almost as cruel as the cold. Our tongues swollen, lips cracked and bleeding. Anik was terribly quiet in my arms. Her breathing, once strong and determined, now came in small spaced gasps. "Anik," I called, shaking her gently. "Stay awake. Tell me about the stars Grandpa taught you." She blinked slowly, her eyes struggling to focus. "Takiasuk," she murmured, mentioning the North Star in our language. "The one that never moves, that always guides us home." "That's right," I encouraged, rubbing her arms to keep her alert. "What others?" "I can see them, Dad," she said, looking at the ceiling of the igloo as if it weren't there. "They're so bright today. Grandpa is showing them to me." My heart ached. "No, Anik. Look at me. Stay with me. It doesn't hurt anymore," she continued, a small smile appearing on her frostbitten lips. "The cold is gone." I knew what that meant. When the body is about to give up, the cold gives way to a deceptive feeling of warmth. It's the last cruel gift of the Arctic before it takes your life. "Anik!" I called more forcefully, shaking her. "Look at me. Let's tell stories. Remember how you liked the stories of the Great Bear?" She slowly turned her face toward me, her eyes half open. "Grandpa is telling that one now. And Mom is laughing so much. I've never seen her laugh like that." Hot tears, the last my dehydrated body could produce, streamed down my face, freezing almost immediately. "Don't go," I pleaded, holding her with the little strength I had left. "Please, daughter, don't go." "It's okay, Dad," she whispered, her small hand touching my face with a tenderness that shattered me. "Don't be sad. I will stay with Mom and Nanook, and Grandpa will show us all the stars. Asterisk, asterisk." Her last words were so soft that I almost lost them in the silence of the igloo. Her hand slipped from my face, falling onto her still chest. And so, in less than 24 hours, I had lost everything. My father, my son, my wife, and now, my daughter, my little star hunter. I held her body against mine, rocking back and forth in the dark. There were no more tears, no more words, just a primal scream that began somewhere deep within my being, a sound that even I did not recognize as human. I screamed until my voice failed. I screamed until my throat bled. I screamed into the white void that had taken everything from me, until there was nothing left but silence. I don't know how long I stayed there, holding my family's bodies. The hours, or perhaps days, merged into a single frozen moment of pain. At some point, the howl of the wind diminished. The light changed. The storm was passing. There was no more reason to fight, no more will to survive. I closed my eyes, letting the cold envelop me, hoping it would finally take me to my loved ones. That's when I heard it. Distant, almost like a dream. The sound of voices, the barking of dogs. A part of me wanted to ignore it. Perhaps it was just hallucinations, the frozen brain creating fantasies before the end. Or maybe, as Anik had said, it was the spirits coming to fetch me. But then the top of our makeshift igloo was opened. Bright light flooded our ice tomb. Excited voices shouted words I could barely comprehend. "Here, we found someone, quick!" Hands touched me, shook me. Worried faces appeared against the clear sky. I recognized some of them. Hunters from our village, along with Canadian Coast Guard officers. "Aputsiak, you're alive." I didn't respond. I couldn't. My voice had been lost somewhere during the night. Besides, what was there to say? They tried to take my family's bodies from my arms. I fought with the little strength I had left. "They're all dead," I heard someone say. "My God, the whole family. Only he survived." Survived? What a strange word to describe what I was. A still-breathing body, perhaps. But alive? Number. The one I was died in that igloo, along with everyone I loved. They carried me outside, wrapped me in thermal blankets, gave me water. My eyes, accustomed to the darkness of the igloo, burned with the light reflected off the snow. The sky was impossibly blue, as if the murderous storm had never existed. "It's a miracle you survived," one of the rescuers said as they placed me in a modern sled. "In this temperature, no one survives more than a few hours without proper shelter." Miracle? What kind of cruel miracle was this that left me alive while taking everyone I loved? As they took me away from the scene, I turned my head to see other men carefully removing my family's bodies from the igloo. They wrapped them in tarps with a silent respect that in another life would have comforted me. Now, I felt nothing, absolutely nothing. The doctors called it severe hypothermia, as if a clinical term could describe the frozen hell we lived through. They talked about frostbite while examining my blackened fingers and damaged feet. Some toes could not be saved, they explained, in clinical, distant voices. I didn't care. What are a few toes compared to an entire family? In a hospital bed in Igloo, I watched the news as our tragedy became a spectacle for the world. Television anchors with solemn expressions described the terrible Inuit tragedy. Arctic survival experts speculated about what went wrong. Politicians expressed their deep condolences. Even the American president commented, apparently shocked by our story, as if our pain was just another event for him to tweet about before moving on with his day. Our bodies, our lives, our culture, all reduced to sensational headlines and debates about climate change. The survivor, that's what they called me. As if that were some kind of achievement, some kind of strength. They didn't understand that surviving was the worst part of my punishment. The funerals took place following our traditions. Our people gathered, sang the old songs, told stories about each of them, about Malik's wisdom, Pipaluk's kindness, Onyx's curiosity, Nanook's easy laughter. I was there, but I wasn't. My body occupied space, but my spirit, all that truly mattered, had remained buried in the ice with them. Today, as I write these words, a testimony, a lament, perhaps a warning, I look out the window and see children playing in the snow that is beginning to melt. They laugh and shout, building little play igloos. One of them looks a bit like Anik. Same determined posture, same focused look as she works in the snow. For a moment, just a brief moment, I feel something different from the constant emptiness. A pang, a pain, a sign that perhaps, somewhere deep inside, is still something alive within me. It's little, it's almost nothing, but it's something. The Inuit people have an ancient belief. Our dead never really leave. Their spirits remain in the land, in the ice, in the wind. They watch over us. They guide us. They wait for us. I don't know if I still believe that. I don't know if I still believe in anything. But as I watch that child playing in the snow, shaping a small igloo with her skillful hands, I whisper their names to the cold wind. Malik, Pipaluk, Anik, Nanook, and for a fleeting moment, I could swear I hear, far away, my daughter's laughter echoing in the ice mountains. Apuchiak's story is not just a tragedy in the Arctic. It is a testament to the struggle against the thin line that separates life from death. The Inuit have faced this reality for millennia, but even ancestral knowledge cannot always overcome the fury of nature. Do not let this narrative be lost. Share it so that more people understand the daily battles of these communities. Subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and survival. When we give voice to indigenous peoples, we do not just preserve cultures. We recognize that their struggle is also ours.